Today, I'd like to share some thoughts on suffering, tensions, and agitations, and how I see them as communication from the intelligence, their gifts. So, when tensions and agitations arise, it's a good sign. When we are working through these the conditioning and the programming and the socializing is starting to be seen for what it is. What tends to happen is because you've been so attached to your body, to your beliefs, to the world out there, the dismantling of this, having had a glimpse of truth or your awakenings, you've started to have an awakening, and that the consciousness is exposing now this contracted, conditioned individual, invariably tensions and agitation will arise. So for me, I started to see a pattern that any given kind of egoic structure that was very strong in me, that needed to be seen, or some kind of conditioning or programming that needed to be seen, what would precede it is some kind of tension or agitation. And the interesting thing was, that consciousness, once it's got its foot in the door of your life, will widen and widen your perspective. That you viscerally, that there is this widening because you're breaking out of this 3D conditioned self. So I think this is what gives the capacity to see the things that you no longer need. So one of the phases that you may have heard about is when people go through a witnessing phase. Now, my witnessing phase lasted some months where it was like I was just observing my life. It felt quite surreal, and then one day it just disappeared. But that isn't necessarily the end of the egoic structures and mechanisms that, they've not necessarily come to an end. So working with the tensions and agitation, they are, as I said, they're little gifts. They're communications that are saying, you've got to listen to this and look at it, but don't attach a story to it. Just listen and observe it and try your best to not create something around it. So one example I have is some years ago, there was a lot of body emotion stuff being released spontaneously. I would find myself crying, and it wasn't because I'd been talking about something or thinking about something. There was just these spontaneous tears and this emotion just coming out of the body. And I learned to just observe it and trust. And that was another fundamental thing that I had to learn, is that the trust element of the process that seems alien, this reorientating and realigning yourself with your true nature as this old 3D, this conditioned self starts to fall away. So the agitations and tensions are all valuable, and it may even seem like, oh, why am I getting this? I'm supposed to be at this place, it may, but suffering is that you are in opposition to what is. That's all suffering is. You are in opposition to what is. And you may feel disappointed, but there is a gift in it, and it's learning to say, okay, this is what I'm being shown. And the more conscious, the more, every time you see, inverted commas, you see something, you recognize something on a deep level, and there's no fighting with it, it could go completely. Mostly I found it was just, eroding. I like the analogy of a sandcastle, and that the ego is this sandcastle, and that over time the water is coming in, and it takes a bit of the sandcastle away every time it goes out again. Or you could have hundreds of these sandcastles that represent lots of aspects of the dysfunctional conditioned self, and the one by one, or maybe simultaneously, I don't know, that these start to disappear. And with this idea of you, this attachment of you that's slowly falling away, that in its place consciousness grows. So these have these tensions and agitations that rise up are really, really important. Not important in the mind sense, but in the sense that they are seen, and they're not a failure of anything. They're an important part of the breaking down of those conditioned structures that you've held on to for such a long time. And then, interestingly, the the illusion of happiness, of the things outside that you believe it's outside of you, that there's this reverse happening where the more that you start to see the crumbling and the falling away of your dependency on everything outside of you, and your mind and your body, over time, the emergence of something more solid and reliable, which is actually your true nature, which is always there, and that peace and contentment do arise in to fill that space that's been created. So it's I would suggest that if you can, you sit with the uncomfortableness of the tensions and agitation as best you can, and that the rewards will come. If you like, the rewards will come from the patience and the love and the no judgment or criticism of the the potential to judge yourself. That if you have patience and trust, it's all coming. It's all coming. And the intelligence that is us is we are being worked on all the time. And I think we're being invited to trust that nothing's wasted. Nothing is wasted.